Hi, this is JJ coming at you with the latest edition of the Warehouse Whiteboard. I am back in the warehouse, and this, of course, is our whiteboard. Glad you're along today. Last night in our student ministry, we had our second week of our discussion on intimacy, God's plan for intimacy, and especially how it relates to sex, the great gift that God has given us to express that intimacy. And the heart of the conversation we've been having thus far and will continue to have is that we want to discover what God's plan is for intimacy, how He has prescribed that to us, and the boundaries that He has set in which we can enjoy a great gift that He's provided. So last night we decided to go back and way back in the Scripture and see what some sort of the original heavy hitters might have to say about this conversation about intimacy. So we went back to the Ten Commandments, and here on the whiteboard I've got my stone tablets that I've drawn up here. And in our conversation around the Ten Commandments, there's a few of them that are sort of the quick answers that we think of when we talk about the idea of sex and intimacy. And so we did talk about adultery. You know, we definitely defined adultery and talked about God's design for the sacredness of marriage. And then we also talked about what it means to covet, to lust after, or to have that desire for something that you shouldn't have. And so we did cover some of those, more common ideas when it comes to the discussion around intimacy. But I challenged the students, and they've stepped right up to it, to look through the rest of the Ten Commandments and see, is there anything else in there that might be of merit, of note in our conversation around intimacy? And both our middle schoolers and our high schoolers brought up the idea of idols. Their commandment number 2, idol worship. It says don't make any other idols, don't make any images that basically would supplant or replace God from His rightful place at the top of our personal hierarchy. And it was a very common thread among many of the students that relationships, that the false ideas that we have around intimacy can easily take that top position in our lives. And that is absolutely not God's plan, God's best for us when it comes to intimacy. And those things that we could put into there are maybe these quote-unquote ideal that the world has pushed on us for what our person that we're going to be in a relationship is supposed to look like or talk like or do whatever. There's these images that are plastered all over the social media feeds or the websites that we scroll through. And nobody really meets those ideals that are out there. And it's an unrealistic thing, and it's not in the right position in the hierarchy. But not just the ideal of that person, but the relationship itself that someone might be in. A dating relationship can also take the place of God if you let it. By getting things out of perspective, by getting your priorities out of order, that loss in perspective puts that relationship in the position of an idol in your life. And both groups were very quick to identify that and identify how that's not God's best. Keeping things in perspective, keeping the whole point of the Ten Commandments really starts here. No other gods before me. God in that number one position. And if we allow anything else to try to come into that number one position, we've got ourselves out of alignment when it comes to being in a relationship with God. And so our quest to understand God's best when it comes to intimacy starts with God, with our relationship with God. And all of our relationships, whether they're friend or family or dating or married relationships, grow out of the abundance of our primary relationship with God. And so God's best plan for intimacy is an outgrowth of our love for Him and the relationship that we have with God. So as we dove into this topic around sex and intimacy, another one of our foundational pieces that we're laying here is that the whole thing grows out of a healthy, thriving relationship with God. As we see in the Ten Commandments, and next week we're going to go New Testament, and we're going to see further evidence that there is a priority that God has for our lives and a great plan that He has for this gift that He's given us, the gift of sex and the idea of intimacy and how that works in our lives. So stay tuned next time. We will see you then for the whiteboard. Thanks for joining me.